James Joyce, Stephen, Style, and Streams of Consciousness. A bit of background about James Joyce as an author before I jump into all of the literary aspects of A Portrait of the Artist. James Joyce is an Irishman who is renowned for his groundbreaking novels Ulysses, the aforementioned A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and Finnegan's Wake. There's also Dubliners, but that's a collection of short stories, so it doesn't really count. With James Joyce being an Irishman, it is a little odd to be covering him in an English literature class, because if there's anything I know about Irish people is that there's no one else they hate more than English people. Beyond Joyce's background, I'm going to be focusing on his stylistics and use of stream of consciousness, specifically the implementations of synthetic and asynthetic parataxis within the novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Now, many articles referring to James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man uses a specific German word.
We are looking at how to pronounce this word, as well as how to say more interesting and of
Bildungsroman,
which, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, is a class of novel that depicts and explores the manner in which the protagonist develops morally and psychologically. Portrait of the Artist follows Stephen Daedalus's growth mentally and morally, so I'd say it's a pretty spot-on novel in terms of fitting the definition. The issue that arises when following a character's growth is that typically, unless it's like the one film that followed that boy for 12 years, the growth is going to happen in the character's head. Following that growth intimately is difficult without constant actions happening to the character that demonstrate the moral growths. And that's not really how life works. We grow as people all the time, every single day and every single moment, physically, morally, psychologically. But we aren't in a novel. Every day isn't going to be a morally ambiguous set of trolley problems that demonstrate our wonderful character growth. The growth of a character happens in their heads, and if we're going to follow a character in a novel who grows psychologically, we have to be in their heads to really understand what they're going through. And following somebody's inner thoughts and their growth as a person in their head, you're typically following a stream of consciousness. And Joyce understood that. Joyce's stream of consciousness allows us a keen insight into Stephen's character, specifically his methods of thinking and the cadence or pace with which he thinks. We'll use this excerpt on page 41, for example. She did not like him to play with Eileen because Eileen was a Protestant. When she was young, she knew children that used to play with Protestants, and the Protestants used to make fun of the litany of the Blessed Virgin. Tower of Ivory, they used to say. House of Gold. How could a woman be a Tower of Ivory or a House of Gold? Who was right then? Just looking at it, it looks like a run-on sentence. That's really because it is. It's not meant to be perfectly grammatically correct. Nobody thinks like that. This is Stephen's inner voice. It's fast, free-flowing. It's not perfect. It doesn't have to be. That's how people think. He's thinking like a human, because he is. He's somebody who's growing. He's questioning notions that were previously established in his life. In the previous excerpt, if you look at the beginning of the sentences, it'll say things like, and she did not like him to play, and when she was young she knew, and the Protestants used to. This repeated connection of sentences and clauses with coordinating conjunctions is called parataxis. Parataxis is the placing of clauses or phrases one after another without coordinating or subordinating connectives. And yes, that goes against exactly what I just said, but there are different forms of parataxis. The two forms of parataxis that we're going to be talking about are synthetic and asynthetic parataxis. Synthetic parataxis is when conjunctions are implemented, and asynthetic is when conjunctions are omitted. Joyce uses both forms in his writings, though the previous excerpt is synthetic. Parataxis as a concept in stylistics isn't exactly new. Parataxis has been used as early as Beowulf, and in the modernist moment, parataxis had been used by one of Joyce's contemporaries earlier than he had done it by one whole year, in fact. That contemporary was named Dorothy Richardson. Richardson wrote Pointed Roofs 1 year before Joyce, and comparing two excerpts between Pointed Roofs and A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man provides us a good look at the distinct usage of parataxis and stream of consciousness between the two contemporary modernist authors. The forms of the community emerged from the Guspo investments, the Dean of Studies, the portly florid bursar with his cap of grey hair, the president, the little priest with feathery hair who wrote devout verses, the squat peasant form of the professor of economics, the tall form of the young professor of mental science, discussing on the landing a case of conscience with his class, like a giraffe cropping high leafage among a herd of antelopes, the grave troubled prefect of the sodality, the plump round-headed professor of Italian with his rogue's eyes. Looking at the excerpt with what we know about the two different forms of parataxis, it's pretty clear this is asyndetic parataxis. It's indicative of Stephen's observations. There's no need to use conjunctions. It's his perception of the world. He sees them sequentially, but he doesn't need to order them with ands and ors because he's seeing them and observing them. The dean, the bursar, the president. They had dreadful eyes. Eyes like the eyes of hostesses she remembered. Eyes she had seen in trains and buses. Eyes from the old school. They came and stood and looked at her, and saw her as she was, without courage, without funds or good clothes or beauty, without charm or interest, without even the skill to play a part. Richardson uses both syndetic and asyndetic parataxis. It shifts from the character's perception, which is asyndetic, to the consciousness and perceptions of the outside, syndetic and asyndetic. Stream of consciousness and the use of parataxis can be complicated at best to follow sometimes. But the thing about it is that it provides an insight into characters that isn't otherwise possible. It's okay to look at actions and situations of characters and determine how they grow from that, but if you're gonna follow somebody in a Bildungsroman, I think I said that right, then you need to understand how they're thinking and how they're feeling and how they react internally to external stimulus. And the only way to do that is to get in their consciousness.